Today, primarily, our conversation is really going to be about the security gap to DevOps. It's a growing space. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about, especially when it pertains to security. And we're going to cover some topics today to kind of help bridge that gap. All right, so here's a quick agenda to kind of put things in context. So I'll be talking a little bit about some facts that kind of creates the foundation for today's conversation, right? As well as where we sourced our information from. And then we'll get into, why are things getting harder to secure, which kind of a little bit obvious, but we'll get there. And the yin to the yang, we'll talk about the bad stuff, but there's going to be some good news as a part of this as well. Next, we'll kind of get into how can we make our companies more secure through DevOps, and then ideas on how to apply improvements for DevOps security. Here we go. So this kind of sets context. So I'm with Tufin, as was alluded to earlier. We're a 14-year-old security software company. The primary market space that we play in is security policy orchestration. To kind of really sum that up, it's really around centralized management, monitoring, and automation around policy enforcement devices. Historically, it was primarily firewalls, but then got into cloud, and you look at security groups. When you look at microservices, it's protecting containers, et cetera. We're a global company. We've won lots of awards. Our customer base is global as well. And it features some of the top companies around the globe and is across many different verticals. So, from that perspective, we've kind of been there, done that. And as an organization, we're privy to a lot of, information as far as, where organizations are going, what they're doing with technology, but more importantly, what the problems that they face as they adopt this new technology. Now, to kind of gather the information that we're going to be covering today, we spoke to, tons of, DevOps engineers. But more importantly, we attended this show where we were privy to speak to probably like 200 plus, literally, over the 2 or 3 days that we're there, to really gather from them, what they're doing, where they're finding issues, where they had concerns, and they had a lot of concerns around security, right? Containers especially is an area where there's been rapid adoption. Adoption's been a lot quicker from a technology perspective. Historically, it usually takes a while for people to really bridge on and adopt certain technologies. But, it's really taken off. It makes application development a lot more agile. So the adoption has been really quick. They provided us, lots of information, and we learned a lot, and that's pretty much what, I want to share with you today. And the context of the conversation was around one of our products, Orca, which is primarily focused around securing the container space, right? So the policy management in the container space. All right. So we're all probably very familiar with the security triad, right? So confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? And then, of course, around the cybersecurity framework. And to start the conversation, I'm going to be primarily focusing around the identify portion of it, right? So when you look at the typical legacy network where, you had your firewalls, you had actual physical systems and hardware within the environment in those legacy networks, security had visibility, right? And it could exercise a lot of control. You could touch it, feel it, taste it. It's right there. It's physically there. You control and have the full access to it. With the advent of private cloud, when we kind of got to virtualization, they still maintain some level of visibility. And they lost some control because, the systems got a little bit deeper in the environment. With public cloud, so we're talking about, like you look at AWS or Google or Azure, they had partial visibility, right? So they start to lose most of the control because now it's out of their purview. It's not on premise anymore. And pretty much what ends up happening is it's the application developers that have the ability to gain access to this environment primarily. And a lot of this stemmed from, with the legacy network environment, security has full control, right? And they own everything. And to get anything done, you've got to go through a change process that's usually lengthy. You've got to get approvals, et cetera. For agility in rolling applications out, if I'm in public cloud, I can just throw up my instance, throw my application in, and all without the purview of security, and I can get things moving quickly, right? So obviously, that was the way to go, right? Because that allows the agility in business. Then came containers, right? Which are even deeper in the environment. And right now, security has very limited visibility, almost none in most cases, and absolutely no control, right? It's totally their purview. And what it really brings us to is really talking about that toss-up between, and this is always what enterprise has to grapple with, right? Is that toss-up between security and business agility, right? If my network is very secure, then I'm not very agile. I can't move very quickly. But then with agility, I lose my security because I lose my controls, which is kind of what the previous slide build alluded to. So again, with a secure network, typical network environment, I've got my firewalls, I have visibility and control around my networks, but it's very slow. It takes a long time for things to happen because they have to go through all these controls, these processes, there's change management around it, so it's very, very slow. With private cloud, it brought a bit more agility. There was still some level of security, but again, you lost it being fully secure, right? And then with the advent of public cloud, which also includes looking at containers as well, the environment at the enterprise is very agile. I can get things done quickly. I can literally launch or deploy a new application in minutes or in sometimes a couple of hours at maximum, right? Whereas in before, it would take me days, could take me weeks, could take me months, because the main thing I was waiting for is the approvals to get it done, right? So we've got the agility, but it's very risky now. So as the old adage goes, build it and come, right? So we're moving towards containers. We expect that we're going to see the same types of incidents that we've seen across any other type of environment, right? So it's definitely coming. What's more important is to understand is that it's a lot easier to do it now. This is just a screen grab from an online source where essentially you have the option of either, and kind of to put this in context, so historically when you looked at the typical hacker, so to speak, you historically used to have a good understanding of technology. You usually have to have a programming background, the ability to write your own scripts, write your own programs, write your own applications. Those days are gone. This is essentially an ad where, if I want to go and launch an exploit, I have the option of getting this as software as a service, where I can actually rent it and utilize it, or I can just buy the application, which is regularly updated. And this allows me to have contained within this app multiple exploits that I can use across multiple environments. There's susceptibility across multiple vendors, as it shows right here. Build is constantly updated, and I pay a simple fee, and I have full access to it. The other dilemma that we face is that as good guys, we follow the rules, right? We always follow the rules. We've got to have approvals, right? We worry about what's the impact when we perform certain things in the environment, right? We limit access because we put access controls in place. We ensure that only specific people in the environment can have the ability to have admin level, et cetera. But the bad guys operate in a completely different way, right? They don't need any approvals, right? What approval, right? Impact is the goal, right? They want to make the most impact, right? They want to get into the environment. They want to break things because that's the way in which they can get access. And they hide and steal identities, so they really don't care. Their idea is by whatever means necessary, right? Very different than how we operate. This is another tidbit here, which is kind of showing this is the end result. So what are they really trying to get to? Historically, as we talked about attacks and breaches before, it was more around nuisance. Today, it's really around getting access to data, right? And here's a site which is providing data for sale. As you can see, they can provide date of birth, social security numbers. I mean, pretty much anything you need to go out and create new identities. It tells us here that our items are first-hand, posted same day they're harvested. So the minute they get the data, it's available online, which is pretty much very true in a lot of cases, right? So this is a scary aspect of it, is that this is really what they're trying to get to, and in many cases, they're very successful in doing it, right? And it's cheap. It's not very expensive. So we're very psychic in the IT world, and we can definitely see the future. And here's where I'm coming from. Who's familiar with this? Anybody in the room? All right, so good. So back to the future. So if you remember, Marty warned the doctor that he was going to get killed, right? So, Marty's from the future, sent this back, told the doctor this is what's going to happen on this particular day, right? So give him that forewarning. We're in that same mode. We're really in the been there, done that, right? So hacks are not new. This video I wanted to play for you guys. I won't be able to play it today because you won't be able to hear the audio. But essentially what it kind of really runs through and demonstrates is that what we're seeing is not new. Hacking is not new. It's been around forever, right? It's just what exploits are utilized, how it's done, and the technologies that it's going against. So, the fact that we're moving to containers is not anything, right? In the same way that we're building and we're looking to secure, there are people that are out there are building and they're looking to break. And here's some examples to kind of elaborate on that fact, right? So left corporate passwords and keys, all data exposed on the internet, right? Data left exposed again. Importantly, this really talks to kind of the topic at hand today when we talk about public cloud and containers. Here we've got a flub that exposes an S3 bucket, right, in Amazon, right? So, so the full server configuration and pricing models are available to anyone that was able to go in there. Now, security historically has typically kind of taken the role as being the judge, jury, and executioner, right? So, draconian measures to kind of keep the law within the environment. I am the law. You must follow what needs to be done. And that hasn't really worked, right? What really needs to happen is we really need to find a common language, right, between security and between the DevOps teams and the other application groups within most enterprises, because that's the only way you're really going to be able to make change and have good security. One of the biggest things that it entails is shifting left. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that terminology as it pertains to development. But basically what it's alluding to is that instead of simply writing an application and deploying it, what you want to do is you want to have some level of scrutiny around the application to look for flaws, look for security issues, any type of impact prior to actually deploying, right? So kind of shift left is the whole thought process behind that. So the big question, are containers safe, right? And in response to that, I'm doing vulnerability scans, so I'm secure. I am doing the typical application scans. Am I secure? Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's part of the way there, right? Because it's only one of the layers that needs to be applied to ensure that you have proper security. The first step, though, is definitely going to be education, right? So that whole judge, dread, draconian approach to security in the environment where, I'm the law, this is what you must do, has to aside, and it has to be really more about ensuring proper education across the organization and across the teams so they fully understand what needs to be done, what the impact is going to be, and that's kind of what the whole shift right mantra helps to allow within the organizations, right? Or shift left, sorry, apologies there. So what's the solution, right? How do we get around this, and what really needs to be applied to ensure that we can secure containers as we move into that era and there's greater adoption, right? So the first level, really when you try to get that really good balance between security and business agility, is visibility. You've got to gain visibility in the environment, right? Without visibility, you don't know what's happening, right? Which we kind of talked about and alluded to in the beginning. From here, we've got to be able to normalize the environments and kind of clean them up to understand, where we have policies, what policies are applied, policies that may be old and need to be removed, need to be modified. Maybe we have policies in place that are too promiscuous, so they allow too much access to various environments. So that's kind of the first step. The second step is really around analysis and design, right? So we want to be able to, prior to actually making changes, be able to do things like understand what is the risk associated with the implementation, but also be able to analyze when we make changes to the environment, right? So, are we making changes to the right system, right? From a policy perspective, is it allowed? Should I be allowing these two applications to talk? Should I be allowing conversations between, say, my database that's on-prem and my application that's sitting out in the cloud, right? So really analysis and design is going to be pretty important. From here, we really want to look to having more of application-driven automation. So historically, when we looked at implementing changes, especially from a policy perspective, it was all based on looking at, say a specific IP address or a specific service, right? But we all know that within enterprise, it's really driven by applications, right? Applications is what rules the roost. So each business unit, and in most cases, for most of us that have worked with firewalls as a good example, right? When you get a change request and it comes in and it says, here's a specific IP address, here's a specific port number, and a change needs to be made, oftentimes, it doesn't provide enough information. But with an application-driven approach, what it really allows for is visibility of what exactly the business unit owns. So for example, as opposed to having a change talk about just simply an IP and a service, I want to grant access to Salesforce.com, right? And I can understand the entire premise of what that looks like. The various connections, in and out of the network environment, all the services associated with it. If services are associated to specific application names, that's the information that I'm getting. So it makes me, and makes the network and the operations teams a lot more educated, in making changes when you take that app-driven approach. The final step is really getting to a point where you can have zero-touch automation, right? Being able to automate changes quickly and easily without having to, go in and do anything manually, right? So from the change request all the way through to the actual change can be fully automated, right? Which will allow for that full agility that we are all looking for in our enterprises to occur, right? While keeping your environment secure, right? Because you have all the various components as a part of the process, taking you all the way up to zero touch. And to sum it up, that's really what we call security policy management, right? So giving you that visibility, the cleanup, so taking you through what we call the maturity state within your environment, kind of the crawl, walk, run type of scenario, all the way up to your zero touch. And of course, what does this make you? Secure, but also agile, right? So less time it's going to take for you to be able to approve and make changes in the environment. So the DevOps and applications teams can get their applications deployed quickly. But it also brings back the ability for security to have visibility and control around what's being executed in the environment, right? Whoops, skipped too far ahead. So again, shared accountability and education is what's really going to allow us to bridge that gap, as well as automating and educating. So, education is one of the components of this, is a matter of not just, again, being 100% draconian, but ensuring that you are educating the team and helping everybody understand what needs to be done and the importance of why these measures are being taken, right? So, we talked about a little bit of stuff today, and definitely want you guys to get something more out of the conversation. So I'll delve a little bit deeper to kind of talk about what an automated change process would look like. So one of the key components is, once you've received actual requests coming in, is automating the risk assessment portion, right? So this makes it a lot quicker and easier for changes to go through, because number one, we're taking more of a preventative approach, right? So historically, a lot of times when it comes to security, we're very reactive, right? So we've got lots of sensors, scanners, detectors in our environment that tell us when things go wrong, right? But when it's gone wrong, it's too late, right? So if compliance has been broken, if a risk has been introduced based on a change, it's already too late, because you've got people who are actively looking for those things to occur to exploit them. So what you want is to be able to be proactive from a risk and security perspective. So being able to actually validate prior to a change and to be able to interrogate to see whether is this risk going to introduce, or sorry, is this change going to introduce any risk to my environment? Is it going to cause me to fall out of compliance, right? I've got to stay compliant with PCI, GLBA, NIST, various other regulatory requirements. So I want to ensure that any changes that I'm making, I can validate those prior to it actually being implemented, so I can know whether it's going to cause any risk, right, or break compliance. But more importantly, if it is, I can then know this ahead of time. I can create an exception, and I can be aware of it, right? Because that's one of the key things you want, is that awareness. But obviously, the awareness from a proactive perspective. This is an example of a matrix, which kind of shows, and specifically what it pertains to is allowing access across zones. So this is a quick and easy way of being able to take your policy within your enterprise environment, centralizing it in one area, which is also one of the big issues that comes up a lot of times. When you get into large compartmentalized organizations, there are lots of different compliance and security requirements across the different teams, right? So you may have certain groups that may have government-related regulatory requirements, ones that are commercial, some that are just following best practice, right? So more importantly, if you can have that centralized in one area, it makes it a lot easier for you to be able to then, from a corporate perspective, regardless of the change, regardless of whichever department or organization within the enterprise is making the change, you can quickly and easily have that risk assessed. Automating the change design, right? So one of the big issues that we see come across a lot of times when changes occur is a change either breaks an environment or it exposes a risk, right? We've seen stories before where an engineer has enacted a change or executed a change in an environment, and because of that change, an entire environment goes down. So being able to automate the design is also very important. A big factor in that is understanding what the overall network security environment looks like, so the topology, right? Understanding what devices are in line to ensure that when you're making a change, you're picking the right devices that are associated with that change request. So I've got a source, I've got a destination, I've got specific services. I need to go out and utilizing topology, understand which devices are in line. Where do I need to make that change in the environment, right? And automating that step makes it, again, agile, quick, and very secure, but also very error-free, right? I think most of you are probably familiar with the traditional methods that are used when doing any type of change design, where they pull up several Visio diagrams, they call various team members, and they kind of pick and choose and figure out, well, which devices do I need to touch? Which routers do I need to go to? And that's where errors come up, right? So automating the design is going to be a very important aspect and step as part of the process. Automated provisioning, right? This is the next step where this also ensures that you're making the changes to the right devices, right? And the right change is being put in place. I'm not going to enact or put a rule in place that's going to be too promiscuous, right? Because I want to, when putting in a change, ensure that I'm making the access as minimal as possible, right? Specific IP addresses, specific services, right? Limiting it as much as possible, right? If we're looking at, for example, next-gen firewalls, I want to ensure that I'm making changes to the right groups, right? And the right application groups in the environment, and making it very limited. And then the last piece, which is very important, is the audit, right? I want to be able to validate and check to see whether, number one, the changes that have gone into place are based on the approved changes that were requested. But I also want to know whether these were authorized or unauthorized, right? So, is this a change that should have gone through, did it go through the proper checks and balances, and is not going to create any risk within my environment? Here's where I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Bob back there? Hi, everyone. My name is Bob Adams.
Where's Bob? Calling Bob.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Especially in the back? Especially in the back? All right. Again, my name is Bob Adams. I'm actually here local up in Frisco, but I'm a regional account manager for the Texas, mainly North Texas region. So thanks, Alex, for going through the DevOps process. And if that's something of interest to anybody, we'll be around after the event to talk to anyone. Okay. When you take a look at Tufin and what we've been doing for since 2005 is really managing different types of multi-vendor environments. So when it comes to managing your security policies, network security policies, and you want to be able to orchestrate policies, you want to be able to automate policies. As Alex alluded to on one of his later slides, is that you want to take the manual process, minimize the manual process of approving policy changes, rule requests, and so forth. If you automate that, you're taking what generally can take weeks, months to get approved for a change request or a rule request, can be now minimized automatedly within a matter of minutes to a matter of hours. That's what automation will help provide. So if you take a look at the initial abstraction layer, we're working with every type of firewall, next generation firewall that's available. Your Cisco's, your Firepowers, your Palo Altos, your Fortinets, Junipers, and so forth. And then we're also working with your routers and switches, so your Cisco, Juniper devices, ACLs, and so forth. And then when we start talking about security and compliance, we're not just talking about firewalls, we're not just talking about routers and switches, we're also talking about hybrid cloud environments. So private, public clouds, so your AWS's, your Azure's, your VMware NSX, Cisco ACI, and so forth. And then we're also moving into, or have been working with our ticketing systems for full integration. So your ServiceNow, your Remedies, HP, and so forth. We're able to actually allow you to apply a ticket and go through the Tufin process of being able to automate the approval and, again, minimize that change control process. Then when you get into the automation capabilities and then the secure app piece, you're actually looking at being able to have security work with your developers, because generally, I can just look around here and make the assumption that they generally don't like to work. Well, there may be some clashing, so to say, based on the experience I've had talking to people. Developers want to have their own environment, security wants to have their own environment, so when you want to be more agile as a company, you want to make sure the two different parts of the organization are working together. So with that, here again are some of the major organizations that we do currently have not just security and compliance, but also automation capabilities into. I've already talked about the, you skipped ahead 1, 2, okay. Then we talk about the different cloud environments, and then here we get into the different SIM integration tools, the policy integration tools, and then you're also looking at the different vulnerability management solutions as well. So you're actually able to do a change control request. You're able to integrate syslog information through your SIM tools, and then also be able to add your vulnerability management scanning information into Tufin as well. And then on the next slide, these are some of the major benefits that we are providing most organizations. We look at the enterprise organization, and we want to make sure that the workflow process is enhanced, because there can be many breaks. You can see a lot of turnaround, a lot of overhead, and so forth with corporate organizations. And if you have a workflow in place, and it's an automated workflow, you're actually, again, able to minimize the amount of time that it's taking to identify a specific policy that may be breaking within your infrastructure. And then now we can hopefully either get to the gift prizes, or Taylor, where are you at? What's next on the agenda? Any questions? I got to get one. I brought 3 $25 gift cards here. So, you got one from me or Aleck?
Well, can you go back to this presentation?
Absolutely. Aleck?
Sure.
Okay, I'd like to go back to that agility matrix that you had up. Sure. Yeah.
My
Okay. Can you discuss a little farther or a little deeper analysis and design being kind of that high, that far up the slope as they are?
Still there.
Farther down.
So to put things in context, this is we call this a maturity slide, right? So in the average enterprise environment that we're getting into, they're not quite here yet, but you've got to start somewhere. So going back to the whole premise of crawl, walk, run, right? So the first step is visibility. You've got a large enterprise environment, you've got multiple vendor products, it's spread across lots of geographies. The first thing you want to do is kind of bring everything into your purview. So if you remember way back when we talked about traditional network, your legacy network environment moving all the way into container, what we've lost right now getting into public cloud and container is the visibility. So we've got to get that back. We've got to get the visibility. Once we have that, that allows us to then start doing the baselining. So that's where the cleanup comes in. I've got a ton of existing rules that I probably have in the environment across different systems. I may even be buying another company, and they're coming in, they're bringing their firewalls and access control devices that also have maybe redundant rules, disabled rules, et cetera, so on. So that's where the cleanup comes in. Once I've done the baselining, and that also probably includes, for example, setting the promiscuity level on certain rules. I may have certain that have an any coefficient, right, which makes it very promiscuous. So that's going to be a part of my cleanup as well. Once I'm done there, where the analysis and design comes in is really kind of taking us now to be more proactive. Now, it can be done in conjunction with carrying out these steps right here, but atypically, you're going to start here and kind of move to here and kind of move up into maturity, right?
So let me.
Sure.
Being where it is in indicating that you're looking at a mess that already exists.
And that's what it is in a lot of cases, unfortunately. Yeah, yeah. But there's right. But there's some environments that we come into where there's some level of visibility already. They're doing some level of cleanup, so they can get right into analysis and design, right? While kind of getting the environment. But I'm telling you, a lot of the large enterprises we go in, I won't call any names, they're still kind of right here. It's the Wild Wild West. Yeah. Any other questions?
So if you implement your platform, what kind of expertise is needed? Because obviously some organizations are not going to be all in, right?
Right.
They're going to start off that bottom part.
Yep.
Way up. Unless you have expertise, and if you're touching so many things in private, public, institute or infrastructure, are we talking? You're going to have to spin up an entire program, people, process, technology.
No.
Something this big.
Yeah. So one of the unique things that really makes us as good as we are in the space is that we work very closely with most of the major enterprise vendors that we support. The Palo Altos, the Checkpoints, the Cisco's, et cetera. So one of the things that, as part of the analysis and design, and actually I'll skip forward here. Where did I put my clicker? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Let me get forward really quickly. Yeah, when we talk about this aspect right here, so the automated design, we actually have logic built into our solution that designs what the rule changes are going to look like. So from an expertise perspective, you don't need to necessarily have Palo Alto expertise on your team or Checkpoint expertise on your team. It's built into the product already. Not really. I mean, it's very easy. It literally takes a couple of minutes to add devices in here. And then because of how the technology works, like for example, if you're using Palo Alto and you're using Panorama. When you add Panorama, it essentially just imports all the firewalls and the device groups directly into the system, so you're done right there. And that takes a couple of minutes to get done. So it's as simple as any one of the engineers connecting to the management platform, or keeps cutting in and out, management platform, or to a specific firewall in the environment. It's that simple. It really varies because different organizations will have the controls in different groups. But primarily we usually see network operations running this. But again, one of the key things about this product is that it allows you to bridge the gap across the organization. So alluding to what I've said, what Bob said, it really allows you to then work with the application groups, the different business groups, because it's a little bit of something for all the various entities within the organization. Any other questions? Let me give you the mic, sorry. Yeah. No worries, it's all good.
So, yes, all right. Going back to your point about DevOps and security, and you mentioned obviously the uncertainty and the non-control in public cloud and then containers. What do you think about the adoption that companies are now starting to make about and introducing DevSecOps, where everyone's responsible for security and implementing secure code? How do you think that will then affect that chain you were mentioning about, containers not being that secure and easy, or and then public cloud? So taking DevSecOps mentality, secure code from the very beginning, and then secure code apps that are pushed into containers and then pushed into AWS or Azure environments. What are your thoughts on that?
So, whoops, I guess it's close to the thing. So absolutely, that will definitely make things a lot better. It kind of goes back to one of the slides I threw up, that whole shift left approach, which is really what the DevSecOps is taking, is that you're integrating security as an integral part of your development process. So you're doing your code scanning, you're doing your security scanning, your risk assessment before you actually deploy. No, that obviously helps to secure the application itself prior to deployment to ensure that it's limited risk, it's potentially not exploitable. But one of the other things that you've got to pay very close attention to is once it's deployed, what happens with the environment, right? So other changes that may occur after deployment. So for example, interconnectivity of the application. How does it talk back to on-prem? Where does it get its data from? And this is where we kind of come in, where it's really around managing the policy, so the policy aspect of security, right? You have a container, it's deployed. Kubernetes is the most primary product that's utilized for security right now. And what you're able to do with Kubernetes is that you can monitor, very similar to what you do with a firewall, you can monitor connectivity access, right, within the application. How does it talk to the different pods that are within the container? But more importantly, interconnectivity outward. So like I talked about in one of the articles that I showed, where an S3 bucket got exposed. They didn't know, right? So when you get into public cloud and you actually really read deep into what they provide from a security perspective, the premise is that they're going to secure the environment for you, which is not true. The security is still in your hands. So yeah, so though the application may be secure, the interconnectivity may not be secure, and that's where the policy management and the policy monitoring comes in, very important to ensure that, not just the application is secure, but who it's talking to and who has access to it as well.
What's your roadmap about offering Tufin as a SaaS with an elastic licensing?
It is on the roadmap. I think we're probably about a year, 2 years out. We haven't seen, so it's not that we can't do it, it's a matter of the level of interest in having it set up that way. Enterprises are still only keen on having the core portion of the product within their enterprise and having it as kind of on-prem. So I think as we see more adoption, but the new products that we've launched that are more cloud and container-centric, Iris and Orca, those are provided as a SaaS-based service. And obviously, it's easier to pallet that because it's supporting areas of the organization that are already in cloud and already in containers. Yeah. Sir, in the red.
You talked about having an audit component.
Yep.
I
briefly about enforcement. It's one thing to audit and find a shortcoming. How do you do the enforcement?
Can you reiterate your question?
Sure. Sorry. So the question was, having the audit component is great, excuse me, but how do you enforce on the audit component? So for our product specifically, it's primarily focused around reporting from an audit perspective, right? So the enforcement piece that we do is kind of let me put things in perspective. When we talk about audit specifically for our product, it's really around auditing and checking the changes that are being put in place. So change request comes in, we want to ensure that when it's actually implemented from an audit perspective, what's implemented is what was requested, right? So somebody asked for HTTPS and then somebody implemented SSH, right? You want to be able to track that and say, that's not the request, that's not what should have been implemented. But more importantly, it's also auditing and tracking changes as well to ensure that if a change does occur within the environment, it's something based on an actual request that came in. So it's still following the change cycle, so to speak, and it is allowing it to stay in compliance. In addition to that, beyond the change part, the audit also applies to from a compliance perspective as well, right? So I've got policies that are enforced that are running in my environment. I want to make sure on a continuous basis that as changes are made, I'm staying compliant, right? If I have specific zones in my environment that should be PCI zones, they should only allow a specific type of traffic between specific subnets, et cetera. I want to ensure that whenever rules are put in place, that it's adhering to that as well. Because what will happen is that, especially as you develop this in an enterprise, you may bring in certain units, you may acquire a new company, and they don't necessarily fall into the purview of the monitoring solution right away, but at least you can, because maybe you're not automating changes in that part of the environment yet, but right out the gate, you can immediately go and audit those policies to look to see or interrogate them to see whether there's any lacking within those policies that need to be fixed. Anybody else? Sure.
I want to build on what you said there.
Sure.
I work in the privileged user monitoring space for regulated accounts.
Okay.
Banking mainly. And so you talked about approving changes onto devices.
Yep.
And I look at it the other way around. A change occurred on a device. How do I prove it was purposeful as opposed to rogue or just a mistake?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to the same thing with the audit, right? So using the scenario that I utilized, changes that go through the system should have been initiated by some type of change request, right? Which could be initiated in Remedy or ServiceNow, or could be done directly in our system. So there's a ticket associated with whatever change is made. So the audit tracking ensures that having that full audit trail to say, here's a request, here's a change that went in. Or if a change goes in and there's no audit trail, that can be flagged immediately to say a change was put in place, but there's no audit trail around it. I don't have a ticket associated with it. I'm going to flag it right away so you're aware of that. Yeah. All right. Sir?
I'll try this without a microphone.
All right, no worries.
Do you have any user data on the cost impact or the dollar savings of deployment of your software?
Absolutely. So Bob can talk a little bit to that. We actually provide our customers as part of most sales and post-sales processes a return on investment type of document, so an ROI tool that we can kind of run through. So, and the savings that we talk about is not necessarily only based on dollar value, but time that's retrieved, right? Because now what ends up happening is where you may have engineers assigned to actually go out and implement these changes, if you're automating it, they can now go do more important work, right? So you'll still need the engineers because they'll still need to monitor this process, ensure that things are put in place. You may have scenarios where when a change is going through, risk is detected. So somebody then has to go and review that ticket to say, okay, here's the risk. Am I going to reject it and send it back? Or will we create an exception and send it forward? So there's still going to be work for the engineers, but they won't be doing the doldrum task of going through and going and implementing changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll add to that is that in a manual change control process, I mean, I've been in security for a long time to understand.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm usually pretty loud, and most people don't ask me for a microphone. But what I was going to add is when you have the whole manual change control process. I remember when vulnerability scanners came out, and then everybody had to get together and manage and say, okay, this one's approved, let's go ahead and send the patch and so forth. When you come to policy management, you have to get the compliance team, you got to get the network team, you got to get the security team, and so forth, either into a room or into an Excel spreadsheet or a bunch of emails to say, this rule request is being approved and so forth. Again, that's the whole manual process that we're trying to eliminate. And we're not trying to say we're taking all of the manual process, but a lot of companies, some of the largest companies in the world, want to eventually get to zero-touch automation. Again, going back, which I brought up several times, was the fact that you're minimizing the amount of days, weeks that we've seen. I just recently had a organization had over 500,000 rules on a Cisco ASA. And we had to do rule recertification. We had to do server decommissioning. But the whole point of that was it was going to take them at least a year with 3 different guys to clean up, 80% of those rules. So, again, removing the whole manual process out. And there's where your ROI comes out. And again, it's different for every organization. Okay, thanks.